Evidence for survival is primarily through mediumship and other phenomena like that. And since there's no bodies to be telling the mediums what's going on, presumably they have to communicate by telepathy or some other non-sensory means. So the history of psychical research started as a result of wanting to see whether or not it was possible, even in principle, for information to transfer mentally in that way. And that, of course, led to lots of laboratory experiments that were focused on psi phenomena in the living, and not so much psi between the living and the dead. And I think the bottom line now is that the body of data suggests that the various psychic experiences that people have reported, that many of them are true in principle. Whether they're true in any particular case is something that science can't answer very well, but in principle we can say yes, that if you get a sufficient number of undergraduates and you run them through the right protocols, you can end up with something that's interesting. So the relationship then back to survival is the possibility that mind is not completely localized in the brain. It may not be purely a brain function, and as such, it raises the possibility that mind is something brain plus. The plus side might be something that survives, given that it doesn't appear to need a body, or at least it's not localized within a body. Okay. It may need a body, actually. You know, it may be that all of the psi phenomena are related to functioning of the brain, pretty much the way that neuroscience says, except that the classical view of the matter associated with the brain is too limited. And so since we know that particles are also wave-like, perhaps the physical brain has wave-like characteristics that we don't have easy ways of measuring yet. And that's where the quantum view comes in, where rather than imagining that all matter is completely localized to where it appears to be, perhaps there are other aspects of it that are located elsewhere, as we see with entanglement. And so if the brain as a physical object is entangled with all other physical objects in the universe, then in a sense I have a brain which is inside my skull, but I have another aspect of my brain which is localized everywhere, or actually is non-local. It exists everywhere. And that then allows all of the psychic phenomena to occur as a result of a functioning brain which is simply larger than the brain that we see when we hold.
I'd say the evidence for life after death is extremely complicated, and for me the biggest difficulty is trying to tease out what is evidence for life after death rather than evidence for refined psychic functioning among the living. If we accept, as I think we must, that human beings have both ESP and psychokinetic abilities, then in principle there seems to be no way of separating out what counts as evidence for psi among the living and what counts as evidence for survival of bodily death. And in fact, to make it even more difficult, people who believe in the mediumistic evidence for life after death are actually committed to the existence of very refined psychic functioning among the living, just to explain how mediums manage to interact with surviving minds of dead people. If we have a situation where, even after careful digging, it looks like no living person is motivated to produce the evidence that is revealed in the course of a seance, and if the material produced in the course of a seance is evidential, if it's verified information about the deceased which no living person knew, at least normally, and if we can rule out a variety of other exotic hypotheses about prodigious memory or savantism or dissociation, not to mention fraud, then in those cases I'd say we have at least prima facie evidence in favor of survival.
Right. Most recently, my gold standard case of a survival of spirit involves a post-mortem chess game that was published in the Journal of Psychical Research in April of 2007. This was a case done by two German psychologists. The psychologists are aware of the problem of super-psi, that is to say, a medium who is highly telepathic and clairvoyant can obtain all sorts of very suggestive information indicating survival, but she's deriving that by what we think of as ordinary telepathy or clairvoyance, rather than from some deceased spirit. So in survival research, it's always very desirable if the medium representing the deceased person can display an ability rather than information. In this case, the two psychologists were both chess players and thought that it would be very interesting if they could convince their elderly German medium to find a deceased chess player, a grandmaster, who could play chess from the beyond with a living grandmaster. And their medium was able to do that. He went into trance and looked through the astral plane or wherever he goes to look, and got the agreement of a deceased Hungarian grandmaster named Geza Meretzi, who was the second strongest in the world in the 1920s. That is, he was a contender for the world champion. He had been able to beat people like Capablanca and Elyachin and the Paul Morphy, the other great chess players of the day, but he never became world champion. But Meretzi agreed that he would play with Viktor Korchnoi, who's a living Russian chess player, who also happens to be second in the world. So in the late 1980s, a match was set up between the deceased Meretzi and the living Korchnoi, where it's kind of long-distance postal chess, where Meretzi would give the medium a move and she would then move the piece, and that would then be communicated by the psychologists to Korchnoi, who would look at the board, record the move, and tell the psychologist what his move was and where to move that on the board that the medium had. That game took about 4 years to complete, this laborious move-by-move game, and in the end, the living player won. Korchnoi beat the deceased Meretzi. But in the middle of the game, 2 years into the game, Korchnoi said that it's not clear who's going to win because Geza Meretzi continues to play the very complicated, compacted game that he was famous for when he was alive. He died in 1950. He was a champion in 1920, but 60 years later, he still plays the same kind of intensely complicated game that he used to play. So he was still recognized for his style and still playing grandmaster strength chess. In the end, Korchnoi did win because he had specific endgame knowledge that Meretzi didn't have. That is, after Meretzi died in 1950, he didn't keep up with recent developments in chess. And it's not that Korchnoi overpowered him, but he was simply more knowledgeable about what to do in certain situations and won. So I was able to take the complete score for the game and send it to my brother-in-law, Bobby Fischer, who was then living in Iceland. Bobby Fischer was world champion, American world champion. And Fischer said that this was indeed grandmaster level play, and that anybody who could go 60 moves with Korchnoi was playing at grandmaster level. So this was a very strong case of a person not only being contactable, but retaining their high level of performance 50 years after their death. And he was Meretzi was able to provide all sorts of anecdotes on the course of his life along with playing this game. He told about playing Raul Capablanca, who had been world champion, And the only time that Korchnoi beat Capablanca was in a game in Vienna when they were playing, and Capablanca was at this match with his girlfriend, his Viennese girlfriend, at the time when Madame Capablanca from Cuba walked into the auditorium, and the great chess master blundered, and Maritzi was able to win the game. This is the sort of thing that was not published in the chess literature, and great effort had to be made to verify this amusing story, and it turned out to be correct, that they were able to verify that that had actually happened. But that's not the kind of thing that this German medium would know. And moreover, at the time of the match, there was no computer that the medium could go to provide the moves. And at grandmaster level play, the number of grandmasters are known. That is, oftentimes if a person comes up with information, you could say they looked it up on the internet, or they asked a friend, or they did research about it. But this was a game that was ongoing in real time, and there was no one that the medium could go to provide moves. There's no way to cheat, is what I'm trying to say. So this has very high-level credibility as a paranormal event.
My name's Lorna Prime. We moved to Deal about 7 years ago and bought a pub on the seafront in Deal called the Port Arms. We knew it was a smuggler's pub, and we knew that there's lots of different things that happened over the years. Nothing particular had happened when we first moved in there, and then we had a refurb where everything was sort of knocked about and emptied, and it was then that we started to notice different things going on, i.e. dark figures, things moving and so on. And then it went on to customers also experiencing things when they were sitting at the bar. This carried on until we left, and even went with us to our next house. We used to have seances, and we identified a couple of the people that were actually resident in the pub. We actually had an incident where we had a fire blanket on the kitchen wall that actually flew across the kitchen. So that was quite interesting.
Did you see it at the time?
Yes.
Were you standing right there?
There was 4 of us in the kitchen at the time.
Four
Yes.
of you saw the blanket?
Yes, we did. Yes. Yeah, and there was also a tin opener on top of the microwave, which lifted up and then just went across the kitchen and lay down on the sink. So that was quite, for us, although I believe in the afterlife and things like that, to see that was absolutely amazing. It was really amazing. In the bar area, we had an area above our head where we stored the different glasses. We had 2 come off, and they would have to have dropped about 6 foot onto the ground, which they did, and they didn't break. And they were standing upright when they got to the floor. We would have people with drinks on their table. They would go to take the drink off the table, and it would just shoot onto the floor. So we had lots of experience, and people would be touched on their shoulder by people. So there was, when things went missing in our flat, it's things like I would perhaps take my wedding rings off or other rings. When I went to get them, they wouldn't be there. They would be in a drawer, perhaps with my underclothes, in places that I would just not have put them.
And the flat is in the pub?
Yes, it was above the pub. So therefore there wasn't normally anyone there, only my husband and I.
Now, you know, maybe you know this, but the thing about things moving and not breaking when they should is commonly reported.
Right.
That is a common thing, that things flying across and they ought to break, but they don't. Or like you say, coming down 6 feet and they should have broken.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like a very interesting case, and probably would be called a haunting.
Yes.
There's all kinds of levels of evidence which you would like to exist. You would like a medium to channel some deceased person, and you can give the person IQ tests, and the person is able to provide their social security number, and you're able to do all these tests and analyze voice patterns and prove that have the medium give a signature of the person, and then some signature experts verify that this is true. But those types of evidence don't exist. That level of there's a level of evidence which doesn't exist, and And all the effort which has been gone into gaining this type of evidence hasn't been all that fruitful, hasn't really created. We have a level of evidence that we would like to have, and we don't have it. And so I think that that's something to think about. You should be aware that there seems to be certain barriers to achieving the evidence that you would like to have. And all folklore and all cultures throughout our human history have dealt with that question. I mean, they're focusing on that question. There's a barrier between life and death, and that barrier is not that easily crossed. And the evidence that you can gather regarding life after death, there's limits to it. There seems to be, you know.
Okay.
So a young person, you know, a student is watching this video, if you're going to devote your life to this area, you may be just hitting your head against the wall. There's barriers to progressing in this way. So you want to get training in some field where there is progress, where the progress is possible, so you can support yourself and make a contribution. Gathering, just look. You know, there's, say people were chasing after ghosts, so they would like to verify the existence of spirits. There's people who spend their whole life doing this, and they take photographs, and then they try and get photographs from 2 angles, and the skeptics say, well, that's not enough, so you want 3 angles or 4 angles, and then the documentation that there's been no fraud. You know, you put locks, and then you need to put locks on the locks, and then locks on the locks of the locks. There's increasing levels of methodological rigor, and there's been very interesting things done, you know, interesting levels of evidence, but apparently it hasn't been adequate to compel skeptical conversions. You know, skeptics are still able to devise alternative explanations, and that's just the social reality that we're living in today.
When I first started coming to Gettysburg, however, I do remember asking some of the local kids, like the lifeguard, okay, are there any ghosts here at Gettysburg? And this is back in mid-1960s. And sure enough, they told me, yeah, there's some ghost stories. And they told me about a haunted cemetery nearby and that type of thing. And then when I became a park ranger here at Gettysburg 6 or 8 years later, they would move me to I was the bachelor in the park, and they would move me to different houses whenever a new family would come in. Well, I'd move into one of the historic houses, and I would always ask for the what's the history, and they'd give me a packet of information on it. Then I'd say, okay, what are the ghost stories? And the National Park Service's official party line is, there are no such things as ghosts. Okay, that's what we had to tell the people when they came in and asked. So I wasn't going to get anything official on the ghosts, so I started asking the people who lived in the places before me. And I got a lot of stories, and interestingly enough, a lot of the things that they told me that had happened in the houses to them happened to me. I had doors that wouldn't stay closed. I heard footsteps on the stairways. I heard a baby crying in the cemetery lodge when I lived there. So I started jotting these things down, because in the back of my mind, I wanted to be a writer, not a park ranger, for the rest of my life. And when I quit the Park Service and started writing full-time, I just approached a local publisher once, and I said, are you interested in a collection of the ghost stories of Gettysburg? And he said, sure. So about 1990, I spent writing that book. In 1991, it came out. And the interesting part about it took 12 years or so to collect all those stories for the first ghost book. Within 2 weeks, I was getting phone calls and letters from people and faxes. This is before email, basically saying, okay, I'm not crazy. Other people have seen this and experienced these things on the Gettysburg battlefield. And so here's what happened to me. And I've collected pretty close to 1,000 stories now. And I mean, a few of them you have to say, these people, I don't know what happened to them, but it doesn't fit into the same category that I'm looking at. But a large number of them, a majority of them, are serious.
We have the ability to talk telepathically to spirits, and I don't exactly know how this works, but I know I'm able to do it. And I know I'm able to feel, and I know I'm able to hear, and I know I'm able to see. And thoughts are on some sort of wave, just like radio waves are. And can I prove it? Well, the proof that I have is that people confirm what I say, or historians confirm what I say, or history confirms what I say. But it's not what I'm making up. I'm just the conduit. I'm just the medium. I'm like a television or radio. It just comes through me. I call myself the human prism. A lot of times I have no idea what I'm saying. I'm just trying to make sense of it. A couple of days ago, I had someone come through and I wrote down paragraphs and paragraphs in French. Well, I don't speak any French, so I had to write it all down phonetically. That's what a true medium is. I try not to put a spin on it. I try to write it exactly as it comes. One day, a few years ago, a little girl was kidnapped, and she was buried alive in Florida. And this is really the start of how I started to work on crimes with law enforcement. And her father came on TV and he said, I ask you all for your help to find my daughter. And I stood up from my bed and I said, not today, I can't deal with this today, this is too sad. And I got very dizzy, and all of a sudden, I was looking through the little girl's eyes, and I was underground, and I saw her long, thin arm. And it was the arm of a little tiny child. And there was a little flicker of light, and there was dust coming down, and I couldn't breathe. And I started to cough, and I was just gasping for breath. And my husband said, "Are you okay?" And he came running in the room, and I couldn't tell what was going on with him. And I just screamed, "God, pull me back, take me away from this." And he pulled me up on the scene. And I looked down, and I saw what was either a trailer or a ranch-style house, and where the little girl was buried in the backyard, and search crews searching all around, but not where she was, further out, people with long sticks and baseball bats, and in the brush, just hacking at the brush, walking around looking for this little girl. And I screamed out to my husband, she's alive, and no one knows it. And I collapsed on the bed and said, I've got to call the FBI, I've got to call law enforcement, she's still alive. And my husband said, if you called, you would never get through. There are probably hundreds of people calling right now with misinformation. They would think that you were crazy, and if they did listen to you, they would think you had something to do with it. And I struggled over it, and I'd never had a vision like this before. So who's to say I was right? So I talked myself out of it. Doubt helped me to live with myself at that very moment. About a month later, sitting in the same place on my bed, I was sitting on the same place on my bed. News report came on the television. They had found the little girl, and she had been buried alive. And at the time, I had the vision. She had been alive. And if I had done something about it, a little girl, like my very own little girl, could have been saved. And I've had to live with that. So now that's brought me to what I do now, because I can't live with myself not being able to help people that I could help or save another child.
Having been brought up in this broad genre of accepting ESP, paranormal phenomena, and the concept of life after death or survival of consciousness, that we are in fact more than our physical bodies. And the question is, well, exactly what is that when we say we're more than our personal bodies? Obviously, you might say that there was a preponderance of belief systems supporting that from the beginning. However, my personality type is very conservative, very probing, very analytical. So here I was battling in my own head about, show me the proof of what I know is obviously true, which is a very strange statement to make, sort of.
That's excellent. I'm glad we got that on tape. I love it.
So if I obviously have a belief or a feeling that this must be true, that we survive, where is that proof? Well, I think that there is proof in information. Information certainly seems to have been passed from a domain other than the physical world. Now, the question is that domain spiritual in nature, some sort of an astral dynamic in nature, an ethereal world where we all walk around with wiggly bodies, or is that simply a realm of information that we sort of translate for ourselves? Certainly people sometimes report meeting others. They seem to have some physical appearance as though we remember them, and there is sort of this warm feeling about departed loved ones in a way. The question is there any tangible evidence? Can we put a meter on this or calibrate in some way, accounting for all the variables in a way that there is no alternative explanation for this information? And the answer is probably there isn't right at the present time any way to eliminate all alternative possibilities. But I return to the axiom of Occam's razor. The most simple explanation probably is the right one. And so as we scientists go out and test, well, it could have been this, it could have been this, it might have been this, maybe you're fooling yourself, or maybe it's just true. I mean, that is the simplest answer. Maybe it is really true. And how many millions upon millions of people in many cultures around the world just assume that it's true. And I have had personal experiences where I have been apart from the physical body. When I was 7, 8, 9 years old, I still had a bedwetting problem. I remember, however, having a personal desire not to do this because my 2 older sisters, they didn't have rubber mats on their bed, and nobody else, my friends, seemed to have rubber mats on their bed. And it was always a worry that I would have if I did a stayover night with a friend, that was a worry. And my mom would always say, make sure you go to the bathroom before you go to bed, those kinds of things. I distinctly remember one night, one evening in which I woke up soaked, I was wet, and I was mad. I was just mad as the dickens that I was wet. And I was screaming, and my mother came running into the room, was worried I'd fallen out of bed and broken my leg or something. And she held me close to her and said, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And I said very strongly, I remember I got out of bed and I went into the bathroom. I sat down on the toilet, and when I began to pee, I woke up wet in the bed here. I am mad. And she hugged me and she began to laugh. And, why is Mom laughing at me when I'm crying? And she explained to me, she said, listen, when you get up at night to go to the bathroom, you have to make sure that you take your body with you. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, sometimes you're in your body and sometimes you're out of your body, just like putting on your pajamas. So you have to make sure when you go into the bathroom to take your body with you. And that sounded so logical to me, perfectly normal, and I never wet the bed again.
Research has been a part of the Institute from the beginning, but you need to understand that the type of research that was done was done because it came out of a need that Bob Monroe himself had. So often, I think we've got something inverted in our society, in our Western culture, which is that we tend to like to think that something is real if we can prove it by science. When in fact, if you look at historical evidence, you see that what comes first for people is the experience. And it's the experience that is the most compelling thing. And so I think that was really true of Bob Monroe's life, and it certainly was true of my life as well. Bob Monroe started having spontaneous out-of-body experiences in the 1950s. And of course, now this was a time when nobody was talking about that kind of phenomenon in the Western world. And so he found himself utterly on his own to try and figure out, A, what this was about, and then B, how to control it, and then C, what do you do with it? So he was in a real hard position because when he first started experiencing these things, he really thought this was part of the death process. He thought he was dying. And so he went through medical testing, he went through psychological testing, and to his surprise, he was okay physically and he was okay emotionally. So that really began to open up a whole new area of exploration for him as he tried to find out, what was this all about? There weren't really too many people that he could talk to, certainly from a scientific perspective. And I think that one of the good things that science, when it's working well in the way that it's supposed to, it does bring an objectivity that can balance the subjectivity of the experience. So I don't see those two as mutually exclusive, but the problem is that often what I see in science is that there are certain biases and assumptions that sort of go unexamined. The prime one being that the only area of legitimate inquiry is the physical world. And I just don't think that's true at all.
And every place I'd go, I would inevitably hear or meet somebody who would say, oh, I've been to the Monroe Institute, or I'm going to the Monroe Institute. So when I was in Egypt, I met a fellow who said, well, I'm going there because I want to study remote viewing, and I've heard that this can really enhance your remote viewing abilities. So I said, well, I'm going to go with you. Where is this place? And he said, it's in Virginia. And I said, oh, it's in my own backyard. I live in Virginia. And I wound up coming to the Monroe Institute to do my first gateway. I can tell you an interesting story that happened to me there. So it's going back to that paranormal kind of experience.
Right.
My parents had been dead. They died about a year before I did my gateway. My mother had Parkinson's syndrome and my dad had emphysema, and they both died in the same year. So a year later, I'm in the gateway program, and I'm getting this intuition to call home, to call my voice machine and check my messages. So, following guidance, I just called my message machine, and my mother's voice was on my message machine. And she kept calling my name very gently. She just kept saying, Patty, Patty, Patty. And it was so out of my paradigm at that time that I immediately deleted it. I know. But I've since come to find out about a lot of people who are doing research with electronic voice communication, instrumental transcommunication. There are groups who are actually in contact with entities, beings, intelligences in the astral plane through technology. I think that the scientific evidence is very important. I think it gives us a framework and it gives us something for our imaginations to build from. I think imagination is an incredible tool. Everything in this world was created in someone's imagination first. And so if we're reading scientific research and papers that tell us people are having these experiences, I think we can put that in our consciousness as a place, a platform to jump from. And for many people, if they didn't have the scientific first, there would be no opening for them to even approach this work.
I had some friends who were actually business associates as well, and they came to one of the very first programs here at the Monroe Institute in this setting back in 1979. And I was at a business meeting with them in Montreal a month or two later, and they started telling me about the experiences they had at the Monroe Institute. And it kind of freaked me out. I'm trained very traditionally as a psychologist, and they were telling me about, talking to dead people and hearing voices and seeing things. And as a traditional psychologist, I was thinking, we lock people up for stuff like this. And so I was very concerned that they had gotten involved in a kind of cult or something that was going to be harmful to them. Another important thing that helped me shift my beliefs or got my attention were these same friends, and it happened to be the same evening that they introduced me to the Course in Miracles. I'd had for years a pain in my shoulders that no one could seem to do anything about. And in this business meeting that we were in during the day, I was increasingly uncomfortable sitting and having traveled. And so we were sitting before dinner that evening, and they noticed I was in some discomfort, and I explained that I'd had this trouble with my shoulder. And they said, well, do you mind if we just put our hands on you? And I said, no, that would be okay. And the two of them came up behind me and just laid their hands on my shoulders. And almost immediately I felt this intense heat. And it was startling. It was so immediate and so intense. And they were just standing there doing what I later learned was Reiki. And when they were finished in 10 minutes, the pain was totally gone. That got my attention. I came here and took the Gateway Voyage, which is the introductory program. I was living and working in Denver at the time, and so I went back to Denver after that week, and I was one of those people who took, this happens to a lot of people actually, but that week was just transformative for me. And I actually ended up moving here the following summer, really in the camp of we cannot prove it scientifically. I believe there's a tremendous amount of reason to think we do survive. Our consciousness does survive. I have personal experiences of that lead me personally to believe it, but in terms of scientific proof, I'm rather doubtful that we're at that stage just now where we have that proof.
My role on the investigations that we do is to work primarily with the medium that we have with us. And my secondary, although I guess Mark might argue that it's the reverse, is I work with the pendulum and the dowsing rods. And we will use those, or I will use those, as a means of communication with spirits that are in the room, or if I'm working with one of the mediums and they have some specific information that they're trying to get, rather than having them be distracted with using the rods or a pendulum, often I will do that. When I'm working with a pendulum or dowsing rod and I think that there's somebody in the room from a ghost or spirit perspective, I usually will establish the criteria of the communication to start with. If I'm using dowsing rods, I will ask if they can show me yes and then show me no with the dowsing rods. If that doesn't work, then I might simply request that they cross the rods for yes and separate them for no. If I'm using a pendulum, I will ask the same questions. And generally, the response that I'm looking for is a pendulum will go in a circular motion for yes and back and forth for no. When I'm working with the rods and the pendulum and I'm trying to determine if there's somebody there, there's a couple of ways that I can do that. If we happen to have a medium working with us at the time, I will work off of what they tell me. So we'll have a conversation first, and I will target communication with a spirit that they have focused in on. I always make sure I'm very specific in the questions that I'm asking. I don't ask open-ended questions such as, is there anybody here that wants to talk to me? I won't do that. I'll target the location. If I'm in a house, I might ask, is there somebody here that used to live in this house?
The way I do EVP is similar in that I like to direct it to a specific name or a specific individual. Being a historian, I'll do research on the historic site where we're going beforehand. Or if I'm, for example, on a battlefield somewhere, they have monuments on these battlefields, and they have everything from the number of the regiment to where the regiment was recruited to names of individuals who were killed or wounded in that on the monument. So I automatically have someone I can try and contact. First and foremost to me, getting the EVP, is that you get noises, you get voices, you get specific answers to questions when nothing can be heard while you're recording. You don't hear it until you play it back. That tells me something. The skeptics will say, well, it's random radio waves. The equipment we use does not have an antenna. It doesn't have any way of receiving anything, any hardware inside that will receive anything except the electronic pulses from the microphone. Never have I gotten on the recorder anything like Yankees 5, Red Sox 2, or I'm preparing to land on runway 47, or never. And I have almost 1,000 EVPs. Sometimes it's gruff. It's just a yes or a hissing type thing. Sometimes it's clicks. Sometimes it's whistles. Sometimes it's a bit of a tune. And often, for example, when I was getting some EVP at the Cashtown Inn, we knew the medium told me we're talking with a Confederate named Andrew. I said, Andrew, what state are you from? And you can hear the 4 syllables, Mississippi. Just about that clear. So, do we want to try and get a little EVP now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to pause, and it might be kind of boring while you're sitting there, but watch the little red light that's on the top of the recorder. Because the little red light will blink when nothing is being recorded, okay? But it will start to glow steadily, or maybe do a little stutter when it is recording. So if it's glowing steadily and you can't hear anything, it means it's recording something, okay? Are there any Confederate soldiers with us here? Soldiers of the Army of Northern Virginia. Who was your commander here at Gettysburg? Will the highest ranking officer or non-com please be the one to speak to us? Did you see how it was going steadily? I think we got something. Let's see what we got. Okay, you heard the loud stuff, right? And nothing.
Conversation or something.
Did you hear there? It sounded like that to me too. There's something going on in the background. I'm going to play that one more time because I want to hear what that was. If you can't hear, you can come a little closer if you want.
Are there any Confederate soldiers with us here? Soldiers of the Army of Northern Virginia. Who is your commander here at Gettysburg? Will the highest ranking officer or non-com please be the one to speak to us?
There's something going on.
I heard
Yeah.
something, but I couldn't tell what he
Sounds like
said.
somebody whispering in the background.
Now, it was in this room that I had probably one of the strangest paranormal experiences I've ever had in my life. Okay, I'll tell you about that right now. I was in Gettysburg, and all of a sudden I get a phone call from the caretaker out here. Caretaker said, Mark, if you want to see a paranormal event happening right before your eyes, come out to the lady farm. Okay. Grabbed my equipment, jumped in the car, got out here. I'm out front knocking on the door, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, what's going to happen here? He opened that door, we walked in here, and right here, where the operating table once stood, was rust-colored liquid. Looked like it was flowing towards the fireplace. On the outside of it was like a serum, a clear serum that had separated from this rust-colored liquid. And then there were drops all about it that looked like they had started to crystallize, okay? So I started taking pictures. of it. And I got a bunch of pictures, and then went on a little mini tour of the rest of the house, and I'll show you the pictures that I got that particular day. Maybe I ought to get a sample of this. So I asked him if he had Kleenex, and I grabbed the Kleenex and I dipped it in this liquid, okay? And I put it in a baggie, and I said, well, I've recorded all this, my job here is done. So I left. 2 hours later, I got a phone call, and he said 2 words, "It's gone." I said, what? He said, "It's gone. It's disappeared." I said, what are you talking about? So I packed all my stuff up again, came out here, we walked in. We walked in, there was nothing on the floor, absolutely nothing. I have a video of him going, look here, he says, this is where it was, right? I said, yeah. And he kind of ran his fingers over it, and then he turned it up, he said, what's this? Thin layer of dust on his finger. Okay? I'm like, I have no idea. And then all of a sudden I'm thinking, wait a minute, what about the sample? I better go see if it's still there. Ran out to the car, pulled out the sample, the stain was still on the Kleenex. So we sent this sample to one of the most prestigious forensic labs in the country. And the results came back. The substance was blood. The species was human.
I feel like there was a partial answer to the commanding officer question.
What was it?
Did you pick up anything on that?
Okay.
I thought it said general and didn't get to finish.
Oh, okay.
General.
All right. Let's play one more time, and then we're going to try to get some more.
See if you hear that.
What we like to do is have some sort of a method to detect these anomalies, and then a method to record them, okay? There's no such thing, it hasn't been invented yet, a ghost detector, all right? There's no such thing. So don't go buy one online, right? What we do have, though, is equipment that you can use to help you detect anomalies in the room. The thermometers we have are quick read thermometers. It's an EMF meter, an electromagnetic field meter. That's a game camera, okay? But it has infrared. For some reason, infrared either makes these anomalies glow, or they get energy from it, or it helps us see them. I'm not sure how it works, but infrared works. And we have set this up in the Cashtown Inn and up in our place. We got 2 hits in the attic of our place. One, we know we have a squirrel. Number 2, there's some amorphous white substance we can't identify.
In order to carry out a séance and to be able to communicate with anyone that may be present, we would always use a highly polished table, a round table, with the letters of the alphabet wrote all the way around on one side, and the numbers on the opposite side. We would have a yes, we would have a no, we would have a hello and goodbye. Then that way, using an upturned glass, whoever wanted to communicate with us could spell out anything that they wanted to say to us by the glass moving to the corresponding letters. They could say hello when they want to do goodbye, yes and no. So that's how we could communicate using the Ouija board. That was our only known way. We also used to, when we knew there was someone present, we used to ask them to make a noise. And we'd say, come on, make a noise. And that was a good way of knowing there was someone there. Before the glass even moved, we'd get something knock, or a glass would knock together. And we always had a candle, or the candle would really flicker, or the flame would go really high, which is normally a spirit drawing near, isn't it? They go into the light. And that was our way of communicating, reference séance, which was very good. It was a very good way of communicating.
Did
Did you turn the lights down?
We never had any other lights on, only the candle. And there would be 2 candles, because that used to give us the light that was over the table then, in order to be able to spell out the words and read the words. Yeah.
How many people would be at a seance?
When I had a seance, it was only ever 4 people, because I just thought that made the seance easier. And then what I would do, I would always, say a little prayer before, just ask to be guided and protected in the circle, to not not let anyone in that shouldn't be there. And then I would open up the seance by saying that we didn't want to harm anyone. We just want to know if there's anyone there that wanted to communicate with us. And then I would always ask if there was anyone there, and then ask if there was anyone around the table they wanted to communicate to. And if they did, we used to ask them if they would just point to the person they wanted to communicate with, and then the glass would go to that person. From there on, I would say, would you like me to communicate with you? And then I would say the name of the person, or would you like them to communicate with you?
Did everybody have a hand on the glass? How did that work?
Always just one finger. Always just one finger on the glass.
One finger from each person?
Yes.
One finger each hand?
One finger from each person on the glass. Always. Yes. I mean, lots of time the glass would move around that quick. That there might only be one finger left, because sometimes you couldn't keep hold of the glass. It would, especially if you asked. We used to have occasions where we'd have other people come in besides Doc, who we class the resident ghost, and Greta, who was another resident ghost. We'd have other people come in that I used to ask them to leave the table because the glass would go berserk. I think, if I was a scientist and I needed evidence to prove that there was an afterlife, I think it'd be very good to sit in on seances, having seances, and asking them questions. It's the answers they're giving, again, confirming that they know something about you when they don't know you at all, which to me is impossible.
All right, so they talk about you, these spirits.
Yes.
Now, do they say anything about their own lives that you've been able to check historically?
One of our ghosts, his name is Doc, and he told us his surname was Pavitt.
How do you spell Pavitt?
Pavitt. We looked it up in the local library, and there is a family of Pavitts in Deal. We couldn't find anything at all about a murder, but one of the Pavitts, his name is Doc, and the year ties up with the year that he was born. We couldn't find anything else about him, unfortunately, because I was really intrigued and really wanted to find that this was a murder, and it was recorded. I think it was in about 1700 and something that he was murdered. So no, I couldn't find that information out, which would have been really good for me to have found that information out.
How did you find the name Doc Pavitt?
Well, we found the Pavitt family first, and then there was photographs of a group of fishermen, and it had got, in inverted commas, Doc for Pavitt as his name, which was really, really interesting. That was really good. So for me, it was wonderful, because that wasn't just a name. And although I didn't need to have it confirmed because I truly believed it, it was just good to see that. It was, oh, this is this man that we're talking to. It was wonderful. It was really good. Yeah, very good.
The way that Bob Monroe used sound, and by the way, his patent was for the use of binaural beats for the exploration of human consciousness. So I need to tell you what a binaural beat is. If you've ever tuned a guitar or a piano, you know that when you have two sounds that are close together but not exact, you get kind of a vibrato or a wavering sound. And this vibrato or wavering sound is actually a third tone between the other two. That third tone is called a binaural beat because it has a certain frequency. When we put a set of headphones on somebody and introduce one tone in one ear and another tone in the other ear, the third sound is not an actual sound. It's actually manufactured in the brain, but it is of a frequency so that the brain eventually starts to mimic that sound to some extent. It's certainly within everybody's control not to do that, but it creates the environment in which the brain can start to resonate in those lower frequencies and start to move into these ranges of experience that are normally reserved for sleep. That's our first destination, which is what we call Focus 10, which is the body asleep, mind awake state. The way that we do this is there is a heavy curtain here that helps to keep the sound out, and then inside here we also have headphones that people put on, and the beds are comfortable so that people can lie down and get to a position where the body isn't a distraction because of aches or pains. And then with the headphones, we put our audio technology, again called HemiSync, through these headphones, and it helps people to move into a state where they are deeply relaxed and yet are able to stay awake, so that they can begin to explore ranges of awareness and consciousness that normally might be reserved for the sleep state or for deep meditative states or highly creative states. This is the monitor station. The monitor will communicate with the person in the booth, and so we can also measure certain parameters: galvanic skin response, skin temperature, and conductance, so that we have a sense of what's going on as the people are moving into the various states. Our first destination point in an introductory program is called Focus 10. That's the mind awake, body asleep state. The next destination would be Focus 12, which is a state of expanded awareness, and then Focus 15, which is the state of no time or a state beyond time. The next one would be Focus 21, which we call the bridge state, which is the bridge between physical reality and non-physical experience. And then we have other focus levels beyond that in our graduate program.
I've taken every program except one, and I think we have about 13 or 14 graduate programs now at the Institute. And I look at each one as an investment in my future. I have a plan, so to speak. I have a belief that we can really live a very long time. I think that's within our human potential. And so I look at every course I take in life, but also at the Monroe Institute, as an investment of what are the qualities, what are the gifts I'd like to take into my long life that I'm predicting for myself. Remote viewing is one. I think it's a wonderful ability to have, just as a human being, to be able to remote view carefully, to do healing work, to access guidance very clearly. That's a wonderful tool. We have another program called Timelines, where we look at past lives or future lives. And what we can do is heal a lot in our lives currently based on information that we know about perhaps past lives that are bleeding through or affecting current reality.
The most exciting thing to me, and I've been here for a lot of years, is when I see people come in at the beginning of a program on a Saturday, and I observe them, and then I see them and talk to them on a week later when they're leaving. You can physically, tangibly see that they have had a transformational experience almost in every case. And that's the most exciting thing, to think that you can have that much impact on an individual in that period of time. My background is in mental health. We'd spend years in therapy helping to get people to change and do things differently, and to come into more satisfying relationship with yourself and with others, and to be more centered. This process to me is it continues to just delight and amaze me. There was a study done by a graduate student a number of years ago, where he looked at Maslow's hierarchy and looked at peak experiences, and out of, I think, the sample size he had, he was interviewing, surveying, and doing follow-up with our Gateway Voyage people and graduates, participants. And out of these figures may not be totally accurate, but they'll be close. Out of something like 220 people who completed the study, 180 of them, some large percentage, had either one or multiple peak experiences during the Gateway program.
I'm very fortunate that a woman came to one of my lectures who happens to be a director for a couple of missing persons networks. And so when I have information from the other side on a missing person or a crime, I can tell her, and she will talk to the detective and set me up with the detective or law enforcement on the case. And then I can have a direct channel to work with law enforcement.
So is it fair to say that this helps legitimate your work so that you get the ear of law enforcement, whereas you might not otherwise?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If someone just calls in with information, law enforcement checks out a lot of different leads, but I know that, for example, on the Stacy Peterson case, there were probably 600 psychics calling in with information on the case, and all the information varied. But having a director of a network call in and put me in touch with a detective legitimizes what I do, and I have an audience with that because I have a history of getting this information correct, getting information that leads to solving cases.
Like I can hear spirits, or I can sense them come close to me, and I can know things that I couldn't know otherwise. Even some things I could say were super ESP, but other things like when I have this person and I feel all the spirits so close into me that I have goosebumps and I feel all this love for somebody I've not just met. I know that it's this, I'm experiencing this other spirit, which is different than me, and I don't need science to do that. But I love it when I get confirmations. So it is true that when, I guess an example would be, I'm not much interested in going somewhere on the battlefield or into an old house and trying to see if I can figure out the name of who lived there or what happened there, if there's no way for me to verify it. So what I like about working as a medium is I get direct feedback of how it's relevant or how it's healing or how it's helpful, and the person acknowledges and says it's true. So I don't know that I would call that science, but it certainly is a feedback loop that is important to me.
I've often wondered about why we're asking the question, and is there an ultimate answer to evidence, and tried to run my mind through thought problems. Let's say, for example, that there is no survival of consciousness at the point of death. So, click, the switch is out. If you find yourself laying there in the darkness saying, see, I told you there was nothing after life, well, guess what? You're there to ask the question, so it becomes a problem. But if you're not there to ask the question, you're not afraid, you're not worried, there's nothing, no concern that you might have. So it's an interesting thing why we're spending so much concern about, well, can you prove to me that some part of me survives death? Maybe just, if it's not my body, maybe it's my belief system, maybe it's my memory of the life I did. You know, is there any hope for me whatsoever? And yet, if there isn't, it sort of like doesn't matter because you're not there to worry about it.
I think our emphasis is on the wrong things here in this world. We spend millions and millions and millions of dollars sending people into outer space. I'm never going, you're never going, we're not even going to know anybody. We spend millions of dollars sending people into the depths of the oceans. For what? I'm not going there. We find a strange squid. I'm never going, you're never going, okay? We spend virtually nothing, no money at all, on afterlife or death studies. We're all going there. I want to know a little more about it, you know what I mean? If I'm heading there, and so should we all.
Tell me about the crystal. Well, the crystal was a gift given to us by a guy who lived on the... What? I'm going to be objective. Good, touche. So tomorrow, if we have time, I'll take you up to the Roberts Mountain Retreat, which is up at the top of the mountain. There's a lake down there. Now we just recently have purchased this property here on the other side of the fence. I'll show you that when you're done. Take you, if we have time, I'll take you over there and show that to you.
This is quartz. It's great. I'm not worried about the sound because we won't hear any sound here. But look at me. A little bit. Okay, that's good. I just want to catch your face. That would probably not be considered cool.
And by the way, you might want to get some photographs of that tomorrow. The facility that we have up there. So we've got these two pieces, and I'm not sure what happened to the third piece.
Did anybody tell you they see a face in that crystal?
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah.
I thought it was just me.
Well, no, it is just you.
And you're gonna tell my psychiatrist now, and they're gonna lock me up.
Well, no. What I'm gonna do is just invite you to come and visit us anytime because you're one of us.
Okay.
So many people have a sense of it being alive. They can feel energy from it. But everybody has their own take on